The wind slammed against the wooden cabin as if trying to tear it from the frozen ground. Snow whirled outside in thick, angry waves, drowning out every sound except the crackling fire behind 6-year-old Hannah Mercer. She clutched her worn quilt tighter, her eyes fixed on the door. Her father, Elias Mercer, tightened the latch on the window again, feeling the cold push through every gap like icy fingers. Then, 3 sharp knocks. Not the timid tapping of a lost traveler. Not the hesitant touch of someone unsure. These knocks were desperate, urgent, almost pleading. Elias froze. No one should be out there. Not in a storm like this. Not on Christmas Eve. Hannah's voice trembled. "Papa, is it Mama's angel?" He swallowed hard. 2 years had passed, but she still waited for miracles. "No, sweetheart," he whispered. "Stay back." Elias reached for his rifle, not out of anger, but habit. Life on the frontier punished the unprepared. He unlatched the door. The blizzard forced itself inside in a burst of white fury, and with it, a figure collapsed at his feet. A woman. Her dress was torn and stiff with frost, boots cracked, fingers blue. Snow tangled in her hair like shards of glass. She lifted her head, eyes dull with exhaustion, yet burning with something unmistakable determination. "Mr. Mercer." Her voice was barely a breath. I came as promised." Hannah gasped softly. Elias felt the air leave his chest. This was her. The woman from the letter. The one answering the advertisement he had written in a moment of loneliness and guilt. A moment he had spent months regretting. "You're Margaret Finch," he said. She nodded, swaying. "I'm sorry." The stage broke down 10 miles back. I walked the rest. I didn't want you or your little girl to think I abandoned my word. Her knees buckled. Elias caught her just before she hit the floor. Something stirred inside him, not romance, not yet, but something deeper, the recognition of a soul that refused to surrender, even when life tried to break her. Hannah moved closer, her small hands touching Margaret's frozen sleeve. "Papa, we have to help her, please." The storm howled louder, shaking the cabin walls. But inside, a different kind of silence settled, heavy, warm, almost sacred. Elias lifted Margaret gently and carried her toward the fire. He didn't know why she had come with nothing but rags. He didn't know what pain hid behind her steady eyes. He didn't know that this fragile stranger would soon change. Everything he thought he knew about family, loyalty, and love. But as he laid her near the flames and felt her cold fingers cling weakly to his sleeve, he knew one thing for certain. This Christmas Eve would mark the beginning of their new life. Margaret didn't wake for hours. The storm outside had swallowed the night whole, and dawn arrived reluctantly, dim and pale behind the frosted windows. Elias sat by the table, elbows on his knees, watching the woman whose fate had somehow become entwined with his overnight. Her breathing was shallow, but steady now, thanks to the heat of the fire and Hannah's tireless attempts to tuck every blanket they owned around her. The girl had refused to sleep, her wide brown eyes fixed on Margaret as though afraid she might vanish like a dream. When Margaret finally stirred, it was small, a twitch of her fingers, a soft, pained exhale. Then her eyes opened, not confused, not frightened, just searching. Elias stepped closer. "Easy, you're safe here." She tried to sit up, but her body rebelled. Elias gently steadied her, and for the first time, she seemed embarrassed, almost ashamed of her weakness. "I apologize, Mr. Mercer," she whispered. "This is not how a lady should arrive, for..." An arrangement. Her cheeks flushed faintly, though her voice carried a lifetime of discipline. Elias tightened his jaw. You walked through a blizzard 10 miles. No one could fault you for collapsing. She lowered her eyes, fingers tightening around the blanket. I couldn't risk missing the date. A promise is a promise. Across the room, Hannah drifted over, carrying a steaming cup of broth with both hands as if it were the most precious thing she owned. I made it, she said proudly. Well, Papa helped. But I mixed the herbs. Margaret's stiff expression softened, something tender flickering across her face. Thank you, sweetheart. The girl beamed. Elias watched the exchange and felt something shift, a small, unfamiliar warmth nudging at the wall he'd spent 2 years building around his heart. He cleared his throat. When the storm eases, we'll get you proper clothes, a warm coat. You shouldn't have to. I don't expect anything, Mr. Mercer, Margaret interrupted gently. I came to earn my place, not to burden you. Her words hit him harder than he expected, not because of pride, but because they echoed how he himself had felt since losing his wife, constantly fighting to prove he wasn't failing his daughter. You're not a burden, Hannah said suddenly, with the blunt certainty only children have. Margaret's eyes glistened. She blinked the emotion away quickly, hiding it under composure. Elias saw it. He filed it away silently. This woman carried hurt, deep and carefully hidden. But she also carried honor. More honor than most people he'd known. Snow thudded against the roof again, reminding them how trapped they were. The storm showed no signs of passing. We'll make do, Elias said, sitting across from her. No one is going anywhere for a while. You need rest. When you're stronger, we'll talk about the arrangement. Margaret nodded, though a shadow crossed her face. Fear, doubt, exhaustion all braided together. She lay back, her gaze drifting toward the dancing firelight. By afternoon, the storm had quieted enough for Elias to step outside. The wind still bit at his skin, but the worst had passed. Snow blanketed the valley like a shroud, untouched and glittering beneath a sky the color of pewter. He needed to check the barn, the horses, the supplies, but mainly, he needed a moment to think. Margaret Finch, a stranger who'd risked her life to keep her word, a woman who arrived with nothing but rags and resolve. He wasn't ready for what her presence stirred in him. He didn't want to betray Sarah's memory, and yet, the cabin felt less cold with Margaret there. As he shoveled a path, he spotted movement down the hill to riders making their way toward his land. Even from a distance, he recognized the sheriff's round silhouette and the slim figure beside him. Mrs. Arlen, the town's most enthusiastic source of gossip. Just what he needed. The riders approached, their horses snorting clouds of steam. Morning, Elias, Sheriff Dobbs called, cheerfully ignorant of the tension building in Elias's shoulders. Heard you got yourself a visitor last night. Mrs. Arlen leaned forward, eyes glittering like a magpie scenting treasure. A woman traveling alone in this weather. Quite the scandal. Elias kept his tone even. Her name is Margaret. She came because I asked her. Mrs. Arlen gasped. So the rumors are true. You really sent for a mail-order bride. Elias' jaw tightened. Rumors spread fast. Faster than the truth, the sheriff chuckled. Folks are curious, that's all. Some say she came half-dead. Others claim she's hiding from the law. Elias stopped shoveling, the shovel sinking into the snow with a soft thud. She walked 10 miles through a blizzard, he said. That's all you need to know. Mrs. Arlen sniffed, clearly disappointed that no scandal was handed to her on a silver platter. Well, The town will talk until they understand who she truly is. That's their problem, Elias muttered. But inside, he felt a flicker of dread. He knew how cruel the town could be to outsiders, how quick they were to judge, how they treated his daughter after Sarah died, whispering behind their backs about curses, fate, God's punishment. He wouldn't let them do the same to Margaret. The sheriff gave a small nod, gentler now. If she needs anything, let us know. Winter's no time for folks to stand alone. Elias watched them ride away, the tracks they left quickly filling with fresh snow. He took a long breath and turned back toward the cabin, where warm lamplight glowed behind the frosted glass. Inside that small wooden home was a woman who had fought her way through a storm because she believed in promises, and a little girl already holding her hand. Elias gripped the door handle. Whatever came from the town, the gossip, judgments, whispers, he would face it. Because for the first time since Sarah died, he felt something resembling purpose, protecting this fragile new hope. By the second morning, Margaret was strong enough to sit upright without trembling. The fire burned bright, and the cabin usually silent, as though suffocating under old memories, felt strangely alive. Hannah hummed as she folded little scraps of fabric into dolls. The scent of boiling oats drifted from the stove. And Margaret, she moved quietly, almost afraid to disturb the delicate balance of their world. Elias watched her from the doorway, arms crossed, trying to understand the unsettled feeling in his chest. She wasn't imposing herself, quite the opposite. Every gesture was careful, respectful, deliberate. She walked as though she expected the floorboards to reject her. When she rose to help with breakfast, Elias stepped forward. "You don't have to work." Margaret paused. "I prefer to keep busy. Idleness makes the mind wander too far." Her eyes drifted to the frosted window. He wondered what memories pulled at her, what she had left behind before this desperate journey. But she wasn't ready to share, and he wasn't ready to ask. Hannah tugged on Margaret's sleeve. "Can you read to me again?" Elias blinked. Again. He hadn't even noticed. Margaret smiled softly and sat beside the girl, picking up a frayed children's reader from the crate near the wall. Her voice steady, warm, patient, filled the room as she helped Hannah sound out each word. The girl leaned against her like she'd known her for years, not days. Elias felt the cabin breathe. That was the only way to describe it. For 2 years, the house had been a shell, functional but hollow, every corner echoing with absence. But Margaret's presence created small, glowing pockets of life, the kind his heart didn't know how to handle. Later, when Hannah went outside to feed the chickens, Elias found Margaret folding laundry with precise, almost military care. He approached her slower this time. "You don't need to feel obligated," he said. "You came here to speak with me first, not to serve the house." Margaret held a shirt in her hands, fingers brushing the fabric. "Service isn't shameful, Mr. Mercer. It's how I show gratitude." Elias frowned. "Gratitude for what?" "For being welcomed," she murmured, avoiding his gaze. He felt something twist in him. Had no one welcomed her before? Before he could respond, Margaret's breath hitched, just barely noticeable, enough to reveal pain she was trying to hide. Elias stepped closer. "You're hurt." She shook her head too quickly. "Just sore from walking. It will pass." But he didn't believe her. Not entirely. Still, he didn't push her. Instead, he picked up the rest of the laundry. "We can finish together," he said. She hesitated, then nodded. It was a small moment, quiet, unremarkable to anyone else. But to Elias, it felt like the first brick laid toward something new, something fragile. something he was afraid to trust. That afternoon, the sky darkened again, heavy with snow yet to fall. Hannah napped by the fire, curled like a kitten, while Margaret sat near the window, mending a torn scarf with neat, practiced stitches. Elias had been chopping wood outside, but when he returned and saw her working, something about the scarf caught his attention. It wasn't hers too fine, too embroidered, too delicate to have survived the life she described. He dried his hands and sat across from her. That scarf belonged to someone important. Margaret's fingers stilled. For a moment, she didn't answer. Then she folded the scarf slowly, almost reverently. It was my mother's. Elias nodded, waiting. He sensed she needed to speak, even if she didn't fully trust him yet. Margaret lowered her gaze. She wasn't a wealthy woman, but she carried dignity. Even in hardship. She taught me that a person's worth is not measured by what they own, but what they endure. Her voice tightened slightly. When she died, I kept this scarf. It's the only thing of hers I still have. Elias felt the familiar ache in his own chest, the one that surfaced every time he thought of Sarah. Loss, recognized loss. He spoke quietly. I'm sorry. Margaret looked up, surprised not at the words, but at the sincerity behind them. People in her past had offered pity, not understanding. Elias gave neither. He offered recognition, the kind only another grieving soul could give. She set the scarf aside. Life isn't always kind, Mr. Mercer, but it gives us chances. Second chances, sometimes. I hoped this might be mine. Elias felt her words sink into him deeper than he expected. Before he could reply, the door burst open and cold air rushed in. Hannah stumbled inside, cheeks flushed from the wind. Papa, Mrs. Arlen was on the road. She said the town knows someone new is here. They're talking about us. Margaret stiffened, tension coiling through her like a struck chord. Elias stepped forward, kneeling to meet his daughter's eyes. It's all right, he said. Talking isn't the same as truth. But they said she's trouble, Hannah whispered, glancing nervously at Margaret. Elias turned, anger flickering in his eyes, not at Hannah, but at the town's sharp tongues. Margaret stood slowly, folding her hands. It's all right, she said softly. People fear what they don't understand. But her voice betrayed her. She wasn't afraid of gossip. She was afraid of being turned away again. Elias took a step toward her, firm and steady. You're staying here, he said. No one's running you off. Not now, not ever. Her breath trembled. Outside, the sky finally broke open, snow drifting down in silent, delicate flakes. Inside, something else settled. Not fear, not doubt. The beginning of trust, fragile, but real. And both of them knew. It was the most dangerous thing of all. The next morning brought a deceptive calm. The sky was pale, almost gentle, as if pretending it hadn't tormented the valley for days. But the cold remained sharp enough to cut skin. Elias woke early, pulled on his coat, and stepped outside to check the livestock. Margaret insisted on coming along, and though Elias hesitated, he didn't refuse. I want to be useful, she said simply, and he believed her. They trudged through snow that reached their calves. The barn stood solid, though the wind had tried its best to peel the roof from its beams. As Elias unlatched the door, Margaret gasped softly at the cold breath that greeted them. Inside, the horses stamped nervously, snorting clouds of white steam. The storm had spooked them. Elias moved to calm the nearest mare, stroking her neck. Margaret approached the second horse, slow and deliberate. The animal eyed her with suspicion at first, but Margaret's calm presence worked like quiet magic. "You've handled horses before," Elias noted. She nodded. "My father worked with freight caravans. I helped when I could." Her tone was neutral, but Elias detected an old bruise in the memory, something unspoken, lingering behind her steady eyes. As they worked, Elias handed her a bucket. "Careful with the latch. It sticks in winter." But before he finished speaking, the metal snapped free, icy water splashing across her boots. Margaret gasped at the cold but didn't drop the bucket. Instead, she straightened with quiet determination and carried on. Elias watched her for a moment, her resilience unsettling him in ways he didn't understand. When the barn chores were done, they stepped back into the open air. Snow glittered like scattered glass. Margaret wrapped her mother's scarf tighter around her neck. "You don't complain much," Elias said as they walked back. "Complaints change nothing," she replied. "Action does." A simple answer, yet it lodged in his mind. Sarah had been gentle, thoughtful, soft-spoken. Margaret was different, quiet too, but forged from harsher winters and heavier burdens. As they neared the cabin, they heard laughter, bright and bubbling, like a spring breaking through ice. She was outside, building a crooked snowman with a carrot nose bent sideways. "Papa, Miss Margaret?" "Look at him." Her voice rang with pure joy. Margaret knelt beside the girl, adjusting the snowman's lopsided smile. Hannah giggled when Margaret added a crooked stick arm that pointed directly at the sky, as if the snowman were demanding answers from heaven. Elias watched how easily Hannah leaned into Margaret's side, how naturally Margaret responded, how gently she brushed snow from the girl's mittens. A warmth he'd feared for 2 years flickered in his chest. Dangerous warmth. Later, when they were all inside, Elias stoked the fire while Margaret prepared tea. The kettle whistled, filling the room with steam. She handed him a cup, and their fingers brushed just briefly, just enough. That evening, the storm began to gather again, deliberate, like a wolf circling before the strike. The wind sighed against the cabin walls, warning of the night to come. Inside, the fire crackled softly. Hannah slept by the hearth, curled beneath quilts, her small chest rising and falling in peaceful rhythm. Margaret sat at the table, mending one of Hannah's torn mittens. Elias watched her from across the room, unable to shake the feeling that she belonged there. Not because of the arrangement, not because of need, because her presence filled a silence he hadn't realized was so loud. He approached the table slowly. "May I ask something?" Margaret's needle hesitated. Of course, in town, they'll talk. More than they already have. And people can be cruel when they don't know someone's story. She swallowed. A shadow passed over her face. "You want to know my story?" He didn't deny it. Margaret set the mitten down, smoothing it with gentle fingers, anything to avoid meeting his eyes. "I wasn't running from the law," she said, "or from scandal. But I was running." Elias remained silent, letting her speak at her pace. "My father died 3 years ago," she continued. "Left debts behind, more than I could repay. The man who bought those debts believed they entitled him to me." Her voice thinned to a brittle thread. "He wasn't violent, not physically, but he had a way of making promises sound like threats." Elias's jaw clenched. "You left to escape him." "I left because staying meant losing who I was." She finally looked up. "When I answered your letter, I wasn't searching for convenience. I was searching for a place where I could live with dignity. And you think you'll find that here?" Margaret didn't answer immediately. She glanced toward Hannah, sleeping peacefully. Then toward the fire. Then toward him. "I don't know," she said softly, "but I hope so." The honesty in her voice struck him harder than anything else. "You deserve that," Elias said. "Dignity, safety, a home." Margaret's breath faltered, and for a moment she looked as though she might cry, but she held the emotion back with admirable strength. "You're very kind, Mr. Mercer," she whispered. "I try to be fair," he replied. "Kindness. That's something I'm learning again." Their eyes held. Too long. Too close. Something unspoken moved between them like a warm current. Before either of them could say another word, a loud knock hammered the door. 3 times. Harsh, forceful. Elias's expression hardened instantly. He moved to the door, rifle within reach. Margaret stood frozen, dread flickering in her eye knot, fear of danger. But fear of recognition? Elias unlatched the door. On the other side stood a man wrapped in a traveler's coat. Face half hidden by the cold butt, his eyes were sharp, burning with intent. "I'm looking for Margaret Finch," he said. Margaret gasped. Elias's grip tightened on the door. Winter wasn't finished with them. Not by a long shot. The stranger stepped into the lantern light, brushing snow from his shoulders. His presence filled the doorway like a storm all its own heavy, determined, unwelcome. Elias planted himself between the intruder and Margaret, who stood frozen behind the table. One hand pressed over her trembling mouth. "I ask you a question," the man said, his voice low, practiced in authority. "Is Margaret Finch here?" "Depends on who's asking," Elias replied. The man straightened. "Jonathan Hale, her guardian, or what remains of one." Margaret flinched as if struck. Elias noticed, and his protective instinct sharpened like a blade. "You shouldn't be here," Margaret whispered. Hale took a step forward. "I traveled 2 states to find you. You vanished. No letter. No explanation. Imagine my concern." Elias didn't miss the false sweetness in the man's tone. Concern didn't. "Bring you across snowbound plains, with a jaw clenched tight enough to crack teeth." "You have no claim here," Elias said firmly. Hale chuckled, dismissive. "I have claim to debts. Debts that fell to her when her father died. She belongs with me until they're settled." Margaret's voice cracked. "That is not what the law says." "But it is what survival says," Hale countered. "And you know it." Elias stepped closer, blocking his view of her entirely. "This is my home. No one takes a woman from it without her consent." Hale's eyes narrowed. "A mail-order bride, is she? So quick to attach herself to another man, yet too proud to honor old agreements." Margaret's breath hitched. Elias felt heat rise in him, a silent fury pressing against his ribs. But he kept his voice steady. "You walk in here spouting claims. But you're talking to the wrong man if you expect fear." Hale's gaze moved around the cabin. Hannah slept by the fire, unaware of the danger. Hale smirked at the peaceful scene. "You've made yourself quite cozy, Margaret," he said. "Playing mother. Playing wife." "That's enough," Elias growled. Hale raised his hands, feigning innocence. "Easy now. I simply want what's owed." Margaret finally found her voice. "You don't want debts. You want control." The admission hung in the air, fragile but undeniable. Elias spoke before Hale could respond. "If she wants to leave with you, she will walk out that door. If she doesn't, you'll walk away alone." Hale's lips curved into something colder than the wind outside. "You think you can shield her? From law? From obligation? From consequences?" "From you," Elias answered. For the first time, Hale's mask cracked. A dangerous silence stretched. Then Hale stepped back, brushing snow from his hat. "Very well. I'll give you time to reconsider. Both of you." He pointed a gloved finger at Margaret. "I'll be in town. Don't make me come collect you." Elias shut the door behind him with a force that rattled the frame. Snow swallowed Hale's figure as he disappeared into the dark. The cabin was still except for the dull thud of wind against the walls. Margaret's hands trembled as she folded them in her lap, her breath uneven. The fire crackled softly beside Hannah, still asleep and blissfully unaware of the threat that had just stepped out of her dreams and into their home. Elias dragged a chair to sit across from Margaret. He kept his voice low, steady, grounding. "Tell me everything." Margaret stared at the flames, gathering the courage to unearth a past she had spent years burying. "My father never meant harm," she began. "He worked hard, too hard, trying to provide after my mother died. But he trusted the wrong people. Men like Jonathan, Hale men who shined boots but carried knives behind their smiles." She swallowed. The debt wasn't large at first, but Hale had a way of twisting numbers, adding fees that didn't exist, turning small loans into shackles. "And he expected you to pay it?" Elias asked. Margaret shook her head. "No, he expected me to marry him." Elias felt his chest tighten. She continued, "I refused. I would have rather worked my hands raw on any ranch in the territory." So he doubled the debt, then tripled it. And each time I refused him, the price grew. Elias leaned back, jaw clenched. "So you ran." "I ran before he could turn a contract into a cage." Her voice faltered. "But I knew he'd come. I just didn't think he'd find me so quickly." Elias studied her carefully, her posture rigid, her eyes hollow with resignation. But beneath the fear, he saw something else. Defiance. Strength. A survivor's fire. "Margaret," he said quietly, "he doesn't own you. Not legally. Not morally. He owns enough influence to act like he does." She pulled her mother's scarf tighter around her shoulders. "And men like him don't accept rejection. They punish it." Elias's voice hardened. "Not in my house." For a moment, she looked at him as if she didn't dare believe the promise in his words, as if she'd lived too long expecting abandonment. "You barely know me," she whispered. "I know enough," he answered. "I know what kind of man he is and what kind of woman you are." Her breath trembled, not from cold, but from the weight of being seen. She looked away, struggling. "If he stays in town, if he spreads rumors, it will ruin your standing. Your daughter. Hannah needs truth, not pretense," Elias said gently. "She needs to see that protecting what is right matters." Silence pooled between them, soft, fragile, warm. Margaret finally exhaled. "I never wanted to bring trouble into your home." "You brought life into it," Elias replied. Her eyes met his, startled, searching. Before either could speak again, Hannah stirred, rubbing her eyes. "Papa, Miss Margaret. Why are you awake?" Margaret quickly wiped her face, forcing a smile. "Just talking, sweetheart. Everything's fine." But when the girl drifted back to sleep, Elias turned to Margaret with a steadiness that left no room for doubt. "We'll face him," he said. "But not alone." Word traveled quickly through the valley, quicker than wind, quicker than truth. By morning, Elias knew the entire town would be whispering about Margaret, about Hale, about debts and scandal, and whatever lies a man like Hale could twist into shape. Elias saddled his mare before dawn. The storm had passed, leaving behind a stillness so sharp It felt like the world was holding its breath. Margaret stood on the porch, wrapped in her mother's scarf, eyes shadowed with worry. "You don't have to face him," she said. "Not for me." Elias tightened the saddle strap. "I'm not facing him for you," he replied. "I'm facing him because a man like that doesn't get to walk into my home and threaten the people under my roof." She looked away, but not fast enough to hide the tremor in her breath. Hannah peeked from behind the door. "Papa, will you be back by breakfast?" Elias leaned down, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "I'll be back before the fire burns low." He mounted the horse, glanced at Margaret one last time, and saw something in her expression he hadn't seen before. Fear not for herself, but for him. He rode toward town. The snow crunched beneath hooves with every deliberate step. When Elias reached the main street, the morning light had just begun to stretch across the rooftops. The town was quiet, shuttered, but a few curious faces peeked through windows. Hale stood outside the saloon. Coat neatly brushed, boots polished, posture confident. A man who believed the world owed him obedience. "You came," Hale said, as Elias dismounted. "I expected as much." Elias approached, unarmed but unyielding. "We're ending this." "Oh, and what is this, precisely?" Hale asked, his voice dripping with mock civility. "A misunderstanding? A debt? A runaway bride?" Elias didn't flinch. "A man trying to claim power he never earned." Hale's jaw tightened. "She belongs with me." "No," Elias said. "She belongs where she chooses." Hale stepped closer. "You think you can protect her? You can't. Men like me make the rules, and men like me break them." The street grew still. Hale's eyes darkened. "Careful, Mercer. You're making enemies." "I've already made one," Elias answered. "And if he touches her again, he'll regret it." For a heartbeat, neither man moved. Then Hale's composure cracked just enough for the truth to show petty. "Furious entitlement. You're throwing your lot in with a woman who can barely clothe herself." Hale spat. "A woman with nothing to offer but trouble." Elias smiled not kindly. "Then why are you so obsessed with keeping her?" Hale's silence was answer enough. Elias leaned in. "Because she said no to you. And men like you can't stand hearing that word." Hale's face flushed with rage. His fists clenched. But Elias didn't step back. At last, Hale exhaled sharply. "Fine, keep her. But don't expect peace. A woman who runs once will run again." Elias shook his head. "The only thing she's running from is you." Margaret waited at the cabin door, hands tightly clasped. She hadn't moved from the spot since Elias left. Not even when Hannah tugged her sleeve, asking for another story. Her eyes remained fixed on the distant trail, where shadows shifted between trees like restless spirits. When Elias finally appeared on horseback, her breath left her in a shudder. Not relief, at least. Not only that. Something deeper. Something she feared naming. He dismounted and approached. She stepped forward, searching his face for wounds, for anger, for defeat. Instead, she found something else: quiet certainty. "What happened?" she asked. "I told him you weren't going anywhere," Elias said simply. She stared at him. "And he believed you." "He didn't have to believe me. He just had to hear me." For the first time in days, the fear in her shoulders eased. They entered the cabin. Hannah ran to Elias, hugging his leg. "Papa, you're safe." Margaret turned to the fire, her voice soft. "You shouldn't have risked yourself." "Margaret," Elias said, "I risked nothing that wasn't worth risking." She trembled. "You don't understand. He'll hold a grudge. Men like him." I'm not afraid of him. I am, she whispered. Elias stepped closer, gently but firmly lifting her chin. You don't have to be. Margaret blinked, stunned by the strength in his voice, the certainty, the warmth, the promise. It was then she realized something. She wasn't fighting alone anymore. The fire crackled. Snow tapped softly at the windows. Hannah hummed as she arranged her tiny dolls, blissfully unaware of the world's darker corners. And for the first time, Margaret felt the weight that had lived inside her chest begin to melt, like winter frost meeting sunlight. I didn't think I would ever find a place where I belonged, she murmured. Elias's eyes softened. Then stay. She looked up, breath-catching. Stay, he repeated. Not because of the arrangement. Not because of need. Because you want to. Silence stretched between them, warm, heavy, sacred. Finally, Margaret whispered, barely audible, I want to. Elias exhaled, the tension melting from him like thawing snow. Hannah looked between them with a child's intuitive smile. Outside, winter began to soften. Tiny shoots of green, fragile but determined, pierced through the melting snow near the cabin. Small signs of spring. New beginnings. Margaret placed her hand over Elias, not fearful, not uncertain, choosing. Elias closed his fingers around hers. In that quiet cabin, surrounded by wood and warmth, and the faintest scent of hope, a broken family stitched itself together again, not perfectly, not instantly, but honestly. And as the first true rays of sunlight touched the valley, Elias knew. This wasn't the end of their story. It was the beginning.